Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 775th New Social Environment. I'm Eleanor, a programs associate here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Meiqin Wang, Chang, and Paul Gladston. We're thrilled to welcome poet Brandan Griffin here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's incredible guests and host. Dr. Meiqin Wang is a full professor at California State University Northridge. Currently, her research focuses on socially engaged art and its related categories such as public art, activism, and ecological art in East Asia. Her major publications include 2 research monographs, Urbanization and Contemporary Chinese Art, and Socially Engaged Art in Contemporary China, as well as 2 edited volumes. Chang is an associate professor of art history and Asian studies at Penn State University, specializing in Chinese, East Asian, and Asian diasporic art of the 20th and 21st centuries. Dr. Tan has published in peer-reviewed journals such as Art Journal and Third Text. Her book, The Minqian Avant-Garde, Contemporary Chinese Artists in Search of the Public, is upcoming from Cornell University Press. And award-winning critical theorist and cultural historian Paul Gladston is the inaugural Judith Neilson Chair Professor of Contemporary Art at the University of New South Wales and a distinguished affiliate fellow of the UK-China Humanities Alliance in Tsinghua University. He is an inaugural co-editor of the book Contemporary East Asian Visual Studies, Culture and Politics, and was founding principal editor of the Journal of Contemporary Chinese Art. And he also recently co-edited the collected edition Visual Culture Wars at the Borders of Contemporary China. And we are so grateful and lucky to have these amazing guests here with us today, and I'm thrilled to pass it over to Paul.
Thank you very much indeed. Before I proceed, I'd just like to say that I'm speaking from Sydney in Australia on Gadigal land, or from Gadigal land, sovereignty over which was never ceded. And it's a great pleasure to be speaking from that land, it has to be said. We've got a really interesting topic tonight. Some of you who may have attended the kind of little sub-series of new social environment that we do occasionally will know that we've brought together differing topics related to art and the Sinosphere and culture in the Sinosphere. And we've got a really interesting, fascinating topic tonight, which is eco-art in the Sinosphere. The topic brings together lots of very engaging, very interesting strands. So it's a very rhizomic subject. On the one hand, many of you will be familiar with the idea of eco-art as something that developed certainly as part of postmodernist art and the counterculture during the 1950s and 60s in America and Europe. And we think very much in those contexts of what were until recently quite obscure groups on the land, sort of neo-Luddist groups as part of the counterculture, including Black cultural groups, many Black cultural groups. And in Europe, figures such as Joseph Beuys, the development of the Green Movement. But we should also think back to Romanticism in the Euro-American context, Luminism, Hudson River School, and their links to Emersonian philosophy are a cornerstone of the development of a modern American art and culture. And that is something which precedes and underlies a lot of thinking around eco-art more recently. And we can also look to Europe and the Romantic movement there. That's been absolutely pivotal in forming a ground, particularly around the aesthetics of sublimity, the way we think about relationships between humanity and ecology and the land. The other big strand here, the signature strand for us today, is the relationship with culture in the Sinosphere. And those of you who've attended some of these, listened to some of these panels before, know that we've discussed this very leaky, uncertain, reciprocal ground between humanity and nature, which is very much a key part of Chinese culture historically, and particularly syncretic Confucian, Taoist, Buddhist culture. The great landscape tradition in Chinese art has an abiding relationship with that particular non-rational relationship. And I think we're going to hear something about all of those things, particularly these relationships, which bring a contemporary eco-art in the Sinosphere into relationship with some of these historical intertextual tendencies. So it's my great delight to begin by introducing Chang, who's going to give us what promises to be a really fascinating introduction to the topic tonight. So Chang, over to you.
Thank you, Paul, for this great introduction, and thank you to Brooklyn Rail for hosting the stimulating conversation that we're enjoying tonight. And so what I'm going to do here is to have a very kind of broad, general, but hopefully not generic introduction of this developing concept. And then my colleague Meiqin will go into more in-depth case studies of individual artworks. So I'm going to start by introducing you to an artist that you probably have already known. And so Xu Bing, who is mostly known as experimenting with words. And here is a work that he taught mostly non-Chinese speaking population how to write calligraphy that looks like Chinese, but it's in fact English. Wordplay is what you're seeing here. But I want to focus more on not just his playing with words, but I'm supposed to be doing this. Who is flipping this? Okay, so not his playing with words, but his really general experiments with systems of signifiers, which include words and images and nature and culture. So here is a work by Xu Bing that seems to be a fairly truthful reproduction of a well-known landscape painting by Wang Shiming, a Qing dynasty painter, who is also in the collection of British Art Museum. But actually the trick of this work is in the back, right? So it's called background story. In Chinese is 背景, the back scene, literally. So it's all these things that we would call natural debris that includes branches, leaves, grass, weeds, and so on, that's being mounted meticulously at the back of a light box so that they appear as a landscape in the front. So, and all these materials were selected in the proximity of the museums in which they're exhibited. So I think this work is really interesting because it is asking us, what is true nature? Is it the orderly, magnanimous, symbolically rich visual scheme that is perfected by centuries of cultivation, which is a landscape we see in the front? Or is it the chaotic, dirty, mundane, organic matter that mostly evades human attention? So I think this work is both an homage and a fundamental challenge to the notion of landscape and nature in this Chinese/Confucian/literati worldview. So going back a bit to a really controversial work of Xu Bing when it was first exhibited in Beijing, and then when it was about to be exhibited in Guggenheim, New York in 2018, it really, was causing so much outrage it has to be removed. So I think this work is really kind of shows us that Xu Bing has always been pondering about the entanglement between culture and nature and the fact that they can almost literally screw each other. So, and this work has always been interpreted as like the kind of China-West sort of clash, because the pig and the mannequin were covered with pseudo-Chinese and pseudo-English. But here I want to propose that this work also proposes the idea that humans are only one species among many, and the relationship with other species is intimate, yet full of tensions. So this is another work by Xu Bing that can be described as participatory or socially engaged art, in which he basically taught children from 5 countries how to paint with words, and more specifically, how to paint the images of trees with words. Okay, so using different languages. And what really kind of impressed me here is that the children have been so creative, not only in terms of absorbing what Xu Bing taught them, but also in coming up with their own like inventive ways of painting trees with words. So what is happening here is that these works, children's works, they were auctioned off together with Xu Bing's inventive copies of these works. And the money they raised from these sales were used to plant trees in these children's communities. So I want to introduce Xu Bing's work here because they give us a preview of the eco-art works of the Sinosphere I want to talk about here today. So it includes the reinvention of the traditional landscape, cross-species experiments, and critical interventions that are site-specific and community-based. So they're also global in scope, but at the same time, building on visual and linguistic repertories that are shared across and beyond the Sinosphere. So before I go to these individual works, I want to give you like a sort of introduction of a few concepts that many of you may already know. So here, I just want to emphasize that the launch of ecological environmentalist movements usually go side by side with the industrialization of society. So that's why it kind of started earlier in Taiwan, which was, you know, more modernized or industrialized earlier than the mainland China. And so going a little bit more specific about the eco-art, so I want to put, first of all, a question mark here, because we usually understand eco-art as starting in the Euro-American context in 1960s, but I think now we increasingly realize that many indigenous communities have been practicing art in a way that can be described as eco-art today, but this history is still being written, right? This history goes back many centuries, but it's still being written. So I think I want to acknowledge that, even though we don't have a systematic picture of that yet. And so eco-criticism, I want to emphasize, is not just about the studying of environmentalist art, but it's really to consider what is embodied in all artifacts that has to do with environment or ecology, such as if you look at a marble statue, you have to think about where the marble comes from and what kind of ecological and human consequences in harvesting and transporting this marble to a location getting produced into artwork. So this is like a broader way to think about ecological conditions in all art and artifacts. And finally, this idea of Sinophone eco-art is something that I, in collaboration with a few scholars and curators and artists, are developing. We have been developing that in the past few years, and it's still like preliminary. So I'm testing some ideas here, and I very much welcome your feedback. So I'm going to introduce 3 types of art that are, I think, are very important and to some degree unique to the Sinosphere. And first of all, I want to introduce the kind of art that builds on and responds to the century-old and highly recognizable Chinese tradition of landscape art, which include paintings in ink and color and things like rocks and gardens. Okay, so this type of art are plenty. Okay, so I want to introduce a few of the most best known ones, such as Yang Yongliang, whose photographs seem to be, again, very truthful reproductions of masterpieces of traditional Chinese art. Here is Fan Kuan's, you know, like this important Fan Kuan hosted in the National Palace Museum in Taipei. But when you zoom in, you can see that the mountains were made of miniature skyscrapers and construction debris, and the trees are power lines, and the water seemed to be like fumigation or smokes. So that was kind of a tricky encounter. And then for these Chinese diasporic artist, Zhang Hongtu, he did very similar things, that he recreated these kind of Asian masterpieces with a modern touch. So that looks, you know, now the Yellow River, instead of being monumental and stormy, now it looks kind of depleted and polluted. So, but these kind of works are always popular among collectors and museums, I would say, but they sometimes kind of assume a false contrast between the past and the present, as if the past of China was free from pollution and the current is in decay, which has, as many scholars have pointed out, is a false contrast because China has been going through environmental degradation for many, many centuries. So I think these kind of artworks, they're important in terms of not just to contrast past with present, but to really have us think more about how our perceptions and interactions with nature is shaped by artworks. So, and it also reminds us of the fundamental artificiality of Chinese landscapes, okay, in paintings and in gardens, because they're not real nature. They're kind of distorted, imagined, projected pieces of nature. As you can see here, like this is a, Chinese garden recreated in the Met that many of us may have seen, but by placing this contemporary work of art that was made with pink silicon in place of original scholar's rock, it really reminds us of the artificiality of the whole scheme, like to create this garden in the middle of Manhattan. And so I think Zhang Wang's rocks are even more popular as artificial reminders of nature. And so you see these type of works as keynote pieces in venues of art, as well as luxury properties all over the world. Why are they so popular? I think they allude to the idea of nature, but also embody artificiality as well as luxury itself. And because it's so shiny and reflective, in a way, it's kind of, Jeff Koons sculptures. So, and then the last piece I introduced in this category is not artwork per se, but it's arguably the largest reproduction of Chinese landscape work anywhere in the world in public. And it's used as a wrap on air ventilation, ironically. So the scholar Deng Li has written about it. And what she argues is that these wrap, together with other nearby features, help to shape our ideas of Chineseness as well as Anthropocene. And it propels us to ask the question, how does the Chinese landscape shape the world and ideas about nature and the human? And I think that's the question all these works of new landscapes sort of force us to ask ourselves. The next group of works are more provocative, I would say, and they're associated with this group of art we would call bioart. And that started by the end of the 20th century, and that involves artists working with biological tech, living tissues, organisms in a sort of pseudo-scientific manner. So in the Sinosphere, I argue, these type of artworks tend to go to ethically problematic territories. Okay, and due to their cultural and legal circumstances, they're really kind of provocative and sometimes troublesome. So I want to give a trigger warning here because the next work I'm going to show involve the use of human fetus and animal parts. So it may be disturbing for some people to see. So I want you to just shut it out. Okay, so here it is. So that was exhibited in an exhibition that was notorious for the use of animal and human parts. And this is not even the most provocative work in that exhibition, but it basically kind of assumes that a new species has been discovered, and this new species was made from, human fetus, and I would assume bird and rodent parts. But this idea of hybridization between humans and other species are not new, right? I mean, here's a work by a Taiwanese artist that was apparently referring to Dolly, the first cloned sheep that was created in 1996 and then died in 2003. So, and the idea of crossbreeding humans and animals using genetic technology is not a future, it's not science fiction anymore, it's actual reality. And I think this work really, by having these hybrid creatures looking at us in this very humane, kind of endearing and sort of deplorable manner, sort of reminds us of this dystopian future that we might achieve if we don't think hard about it. So, and then this is, I would say this type of art is proliferate in Taiwan for some reason. Okay, so this artist, Pei Yingling, she actually founded the Taiwan BioArt group. And in this work, what she did was basically to use smallpox vaccine to create tattoos on human bodies. All right, so on forehead, on arms, and basically it kind of asks the question like what it means when we use artificial means to enhance our physical appearance, right? This is a kind of strange case of that, but we do that all the time. And this artist, Taiwanese artist, was actually trained as a biologist. She had a PhD in biology, and then she did this work, which basically involves collecting genetic samples from volunteers and implanting them into other species, such as bananas, orchids, and E. coli, the bacteria, and then the volunteers adopted these things, these objects as their offsprings. So that kind of asks the question of what it means to procreate, to extend your life beyond death. And so finally, this work in the group by Zheng Bo, who was born in Beijing and based in Hong Kong, and who did this video and performance art in the suburbs of Taipei, in which a group of young queer men had sex with and amongst very lush forest of ferns. So, and I wrote about this work in other occasions, and basically I argue that these videos are beautiful and erotic, but also highly disturbing because in them, ferns have acquired human-like agency while humans are reduced to organic matter. So all these works here help us reflect what it means to be human in our post-human age, where our bodies and minds could be supplemented or replaced by other organic or man-made objects, such as biotech or AI. Okay, finally, this group of artwork I'm going to talk about last. It's site-specific interventions. And they are the sort of artworks that are usually collaborative and sometimes involves prolonged interactions with the local communities aiming to make a difference in the management of land and its resources. So this fight over land, I argue, is especially intense in the Sinosphere because they tend to be densely populated and the land is subjected to all kinds of political and economic interests. So this work is actually probably the earliest work of eco-art in China that was organized by an American curator, and it really kind of aims to remind people or wake people up of how polluted the river has become using these efforts that are sometimes deliberately futile. And here is a much later, much more recent work in Wuhan that was really using art to voice people's protest against a real estate grab of part of the public lake that is in the center of the city. Okay, so there were, real estate developers in alliance with local government trying to use 500 acres of the lake to turn that into artificial island and to build high, resort hotels, high-end condos, theme parks, and to prevent people from accessing to it. So the artists were using the art to kind of voice the dissent while the actual protests were hushed on the media. And some of the protests are playful there, and especially this piece really kind of allowed people to enjoy intimate contact with the resources before they became inaccessible. So I think this kind of joy was also a mobilizing kind of device that's being used here. And then these type of site-specific interventions are most successful in Taiwan, I would argue, because the public as well as the government there seem to be more open to these type of interventions. And this work has been very successful by the curator and artist Wu Mali, with whom I had the honor of collaborating in some occasions. And this really successfully restored the agricultural and ecological vitality of a polluted river and its surroundings using many community events that I can talk about later if we have time. And finally, the last work I want to talk about was partially inspired by Wu Mali's act. And this happens in Hong Kong, where land is the most expensive, most valuable anywhere in the world, I would argue. And then this artist, Wallace, really kind of used many years to remind the communities of the condition of the river, of the Taikang River, which was about to be covered by the government. And he really, one most effective thing he did was to put artists in residency in many local schools. And then they collaborated with students to create all these public awareness kind of art projects that over a long term really changed the landscape, around the Taikan River, turned this stinky river into a green corridor with public parks and some local vendor markets. And when I was visiting there in 2015, we actually saw fish, groups of fish, and a heron was kind of battling the water there, which was a miracle among all these skyscrapers. So I think I want to end in this hopeful note that art may indeed have the power to heal land when it is practiced not only by the artists, but also by the broader public. And my colleague Meiqin will talk more about artworks that aim to heal land. Thank you.
Chang, many thanks. I think you raised a lot of interesting issues that hopefully we'll be able to talk a bit more about, but certainly fantastic to draw attention to the distinction between idealizations of the landscape in Chinese culture and the actual historical situation. I think that's very important, just as important as drawing attention to the same in other contexts. But also I think what you touched on, that we need to think about the relationship between tendencies like this in the Sinosphere and in other cultural contexts. So maybe we can come back to that, and some great examples, I think, of contemporary works that have attempted to engage with ecological questions. But again, we'll come back to that. So thank you very much. Meiqin, your turn.
Yes, I'm ready.
Ready.
Yes. And thank you, Paul, and all people loyal for making this exchange possible. And Chang, I really enjoyed your discussion of the major categories of eco art that have been currently practiced in the field. I will share my thoughts on the subject with two cases from mainland China. So yeah, this is the one. You are now looking at a massive installation artwork entitled Wounded Soil, which takes the shape of a mound on top of which perches a steel bomb. Shanghai-based artist Song Chen created this piece using all kinds of polluted soil that she has collected in the past 6 years to comment on the dire situation that humanity has inflicted upon nature. The dirt mound resembles a prasita, indicating that the life-giving worm is in morbid state and no longer able to support life. This striking installation represents the artist's deep concern of humanity's mindless destruction of their own life support systems, soil, land, and by extension, planet Earth, as embodied in the way that they polluted the soil. It takes nature thousands of years to create fertile soil that can support living organisms, but it only takes human society a little bit of time to destroy their fertility. And this work is the central piece of Song Chen's solo exhibition entitled Healing Land. Next, please. The exhibition opened on December 5th, 2019 in Suzhou True Cultural Museum in honor of the World Soil Day. So December 5th was officially recognized by the UN General Assembly as the World Soil Day in 2014 to raise awareness of the importance of soil. And not by coincidence, she started planning this exhibition in 2014. The exhibition consists of calligraphy, painting, installation, sculpture, and video works, all using soil as the raw material to invoke critical reflection of human-soil relationship and calling for due respect for soil. She considers soil a primordial source of life and wishes that more people could see that. And Song Chen is one of the artists that I took as a case study, as a case to study eco art from mainland China, which seemed to have somewhat taken off in the past couple of years, especially around 2020. Quite a few exhibitions, festivals featuring eco art, large or small, have appeared in different cities, aiming to promote ecological awareness or ecological literacy among the public via creative practices. They tend to explore the interconnectedness between human and the natural ecosystems, critique our current unsustainable lifestyles, and the accompanying environmental degradation, or advocate for a non-exploitative, fundamentally reciprocal, and ecologically sensitive human-nature relationships. Among many tendencies showcased by ecologically charged artists and art collectives in recent years, is a renewed awareness of the importance of soil in human existence and an effort to foreground this basic element of nature in art making. And my discussion today focuses on this point. So Song Chen has worked with soil as her primary medium for more than a decade. She sees soil as the most basic substance that constitutes the world, apparently inspired by an ancient Chinese definition of soil as, quote, what that gives birth to all lives. Therefore, when soil has problem, all lives will be impacted sooner or later. Next, please. The core piece of her Healing Land exhibition is accompanied by a display of soil specimens labeled as white garbage polluted soil, chemical polluted soil, medical waste polluted soil, and so on. And a documentary that recorded her process of engaging with and collecting soil was also displayed next to the massive installation. Next, please. Another quite powerful piece in the exhibition is Son of the Earth. It takes inspiration from the ancient Chinese myth about Pangu, which says that at the beginning, there was nothing in the universe except a formless chaos. Then the first supreme being, Pangu, emerged, and he shaped the chaos into form, separated the sky and the earth, and thus created the world where we now live in. Using soil and dried branches, Song modeled an adolescent body tightly hugging its knees amid a thick circle of branches that seem to grow out of this body into all directions to form a circle. Or we may also see the body seem to emerge from the center of and being supported by the branches. Hanging in the air, the work metaphors the chaos at the beginning of the universe where things are in the middle of taking shape and they are interrelated from each other. You probably can see clearly the affinity between Song's creative engagement with soil and traditional Chinese society's deep respect to soil. One ancient Chinese creation, next please, had this Nuwa creates humans, tells that the great goddess Nuwa existed at the beginning of the time and created animals and later humans using yellowish soil. Important to note that the animals were created first before humans. The substance thus is the medium of human creation. It is also final resting place after humans are done their life, at least in traditional Chinese society. Therefore, Song persisted, quote, protecting the soil is actually protecting the future of humanity. Next, please. The exhibition also showcased a number of Song's earlier series, such as Ink on Soil and The Walking Landscape. In the former, she experimented with mixing clay and ink to create images that resemble traditional Chinese landscape paintings. In the latter, next please, she sculpted a landscape motif with a mountain range, a pavilion, and an old tree on top of two walking legs. This interesting piece metaphors a typical practice of traditional Chinese literati, indulging oneself in the wonder of nature. It also embodies her personal journey as an artist who has walked across China in order to learn about the conditions of soil from different lands. Using soil as the medium to express and interpret her understanding of traditional Chinese philosophical thoughts, Song's work calls for reflection of China's headlong plunge into modernization, industrialization, and urbanization, a process that seeks to leave soil, land, and rurality behind. For her, the process has eroded the material base of Chinese culture and the human culture as a whole and induced numerous problems. The severity of soil pollution is but one of the many devastating ecological and environmental consequences of this recent episode of human development, which actually is a very short episode in the history of humanities. 1 year later, on the same World Soil Day in 2020, she had another major soil exhibition opening in the same museum. Next, please. This time is entitled Soil Ecological Art Experiment Exhibition. It was associated with a series of artist-led science popularization program aiming to promote the Soil Day and care for soil among the public. Reaching out to the public and getting people closer to soil has shaped her recent artistic efforts. Most recently, in just this past February, next please, she initiated a Eat Soil Day as part of a collaborative project, Soil and Food Public Art Project, to promote awareness about the close and now very troubled relationship between soil and food. And I have to find out how this went, so I will go to my next case. The next slide, please. Jin Li Pen, an art educator and a self-identified eco artist. This is him during an online class introducing Healing Garden Project, a collaborative eco public art project and a community garden he co-launched in 2019 on the construction junkyard of Sichuan Fine Arts Institute, or SUNY, in Chongqing. He and his collaborators, including students of SUNY and community members, started with very basic activities. Next, please. They were doing field research and learning about waste management at SUNY campus, sorting and recycling construction waste, and building gardening beds, retaining walls and pathways with discarded materials they found there. The first showcase of Healing Garden to the public was in 2020, when this project participated in Chongqing Festival, Chongqing Ecological Art Festival, or CEF. Next, please. It's a 1-month citywide festival participated by art faculty students from 8 universities and a number of national and local NGOs. It consists of exhibitions, community-based projects, workshops, and public programs that were staged in different art spaces and neighborhoods across the city. CEF was envisioned to be a multi-dimensional platform exploring the potential of eco art, not only as an art category, but also as a methodology to stimulate community engagement and collective actions. Healing Garden project I just briefly discussed exemplifies the spirit of the festival. Next, please. So in 2020, everything visitors saw at the site came from recycled materials, and there was really not much to be seen. A recycled plastic serves as the nameplate. Next to this is the wooden plank with big Chinese character, "Action creates future," speaking to Jing's faith in artistic activism and his future-oriented practice. Next, please. Not far away, a recycled wooden tea plate hangs on the fence, on which it's a description of Healing Garden Project, and it reads, translation here, "It is a community eco art project that seeks to transform the construction junkyard into a community food garden. At a time when COVID-19 pandemic is ravaging the world, the project seeks to carry out multiple levels of healing with humans, nature, and the society as it engages in ecological food production and ecological restoration following the principle of permaculture." Jing takes a holistic view on healing in this project. Converting a junkyard into a fertile ground for organic gardening is just a starting point to introduce an awareness towards the underlying interconnectedness of all seemingly different and independent systems invented by human society, such as art, ecology, education, science, economics, so on. Since its first public appearance, Healing Garden has continued to function as a site of eco-public art making, where Jing coordinates among artist students, permaculture practitioners, and community members to learn about how natural ecosystems work. He has initiated many sub-projects at Healing Garden where people relearn how to work with nature by making eco-public art that takes diverse forms such as food gardening, composting, beekeeping, insect hotels, seed libraries, athletic workshops, among many others. Next, please. A major ongoing sub-project is Healing Garden Community Composting and Soil Cultivation Project, which he refers to as the Soil Art Project. This aims to compost the raw kitchen waste from the canteen on SUNY campus. It involves building composting facilities from waste, collecting and composting kitchen scraps, harvesting rainwater, and learning about the biology and working of soil. In the process, the project explores topics such as soil restoration, microbiology, community gardening, waste reduction, carbon neutralization, and other things that can be practiced individually and at the community level. Next, please. To expand the composting endeavor beyond the healing garden, Jing has held multiple versions of Earthworm Tower Ecological Aesthetic Education Workshop. Next, please. Which involves participants making ceramic pots for worm composting using traditional techniques and locally available clay while learning about how seemingly different subjects such as soil science, gardening, public art, landscaping, healing can be meaningfully integrated. The resulting ceramic pots from the workshop have been installed at the various grounds of SUNY campus. Next, please. Simultaneously serving as new landscape artworks and composters for taking in food scraps to compost. For Jing, this is the kind of eco art that can implant system thinking, cultivate ecological literacy, and promote an expanded concept about art. Next, please. Here is another project, Healing Garden Seed Action Program. It's an ongoing one that he launched in 2021. Seeking to research, collect, store, present, and share seeds as a way to rebuild humanity's connection with seeds and soil. The project involves a series of forums and workshops during which participants discuss topics such as seed diversity and food sovereignty and food security or insecurity, create portable facilities to serve as seed libraries in public spaces on and off SUNY campus, and distribute seeds of native crops and plants to the public for planting at home or in their own community spaces. The project has multiple and interrelated aims as it seeks to encourage community planting, create pollinator-friendly environment, preserve indigenous knowledge and culture, and understand the wisdom embodied in seed, soil, and nature at large. Next, please. And again, this project reminds of the importance of healthy soil for successful planting, an endeavor that Jing has continued to advance via workshops on SUNY campus, on the street, in shopping malls. So I'm going to sum up. It's like a conclusion, but really not a conclusion, like concluding remarks through bringing back sensory and material interactions with soil in the process of art making. Both Song Cheng and Jing Lipan seek to raise awareness that human behaviors can disrupt and damage ecosystems or fortify the ability of ecosystem to support life. The significance of their work can be understood in light of the rising discourse of eco-aesthetics, an aesthetic practice that foregrounds ecological value by situating an important human activity, art, back to the material base of human existence, literally down to earth. This is an aesthetic discourse of paramount importance in our age of ecological crisis. It strives to reconnect art, culture, and humanity to the material environment that makes all these human activities possible, and calls for responsible material interactions with nature. Creative endeavors here function to stimulate awareness and efforts in fostering connection with, understanding of, and caring for the environment, simply reconnecting people to place, nature, and the ecosystems of the earth. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Thank you.
Meiqin, thank you very much. I think it's extremely helpful in situating different approaches to the subject that we're talking about, ones that are kind of more obviously works of art in the conventional modernist and postmodernist sense, and also other works which are socially engaged, which are perhaps the idea of art is more attenuated or less clear-cut. So to both of you, just a question which might be a little bit provocative is, you know, how important is it to bring or use the term art and aesthetics here? I mean, I think we can see, say, with Song Chen's work, that the work itself is clearly meant to be exhibited or shown and to be received by audiences as artwork. Whereas other things that you showed here, like Jin Lipeng's work and Chang, you were showing some work towards the end, which was kind of groups of artists getting involved in garden projects and ecological projects of one sort or another. Is the term art and aesthetics a useful one to use in defining all of the work that we've just seen? Chang, perhaps you could answer that first.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very kind of old question, I guess, when it comes to especially to kind of socially engaged art, participatory art, performance art, right? So, and I think if we understand aesthetics in ways that are beyond visual and it's more about experiential, I think that certainly matters, aesthetics. And I would say there is still a line that can be drawn between art and activism. So if we talk about the kind of works I discussed, I would say it not only involves the creation of objects that can be displayed, but sometimes it involves the kind of experiences that is really out of the routine and expected kind of rationales of everyday life, right? So like if you kind of just jump with your BMW bike, you know, if you just jump with your bike into the lake that was about to be filled up and cordoned off, then you're kind of having these moments of unconventional joy that allows you to escape this kind of routinized lifestyle defined by capitalism or normal social structures. And I think this is a kind of experience that we can call aesthetic experiences, even in a kind of Kantian sort of manner, because it's disinterested. It's not gaining your anything profitable or tangible, but it does allow you to have a moment that goes above and beyond your everyday existence. So yeah, I would say that aesthetics still matters, but it's not just in terms of object creation.
Thank you. Very, very interesting response. Meiqin, what do you think?
Art and aesthetics? I definitely echo Chang. Of course, art and aesthetic matter so much. For one hand, that's what the artists themselves consider, right? That they consider what they are doing are still art. So I think that's on one hand, we really want to take into account what the artists are positioning themselves. But on the other hand, as Chang was saying, like socially engaged art and now ecological art, right? Like Jimmy Peng, definitely, he intentionally in his practice and his classroom teaching, he aimed to challenge the modernist notion of art. And he actually so much want to really go beyond that. So experience for him, and also participation, art as a how do you say a crystal, right? As a like a magnet that really opened up more spaces, new spaces for people to talk about the problems, to really come up with creative solutions. For him, that's what art should be. Okay, so he actually identifies like art for the future, because it's definitely not what's being promoted and expected in the mainstream right now. And also, I was thinking about the crisis that we are dealing with. Like, I think it's undeniable we are dealing with ecological crisis, but I mean the crisis can be so daunting and so complex that maybe for ordinary people it's harder to grab. It's really hard. I mean, scientists have been coming up with those warning numbers several decades ago, but really the art was being slow in catching up with. Maybe one reason is because it's so complicated, and for ordinarily a citizen to understand the implication of that. And in a sense, I think art and artists can really help by making, by using their imaginative abilities, using their creative ability to really speak in a language that hopefully can reach to more people beyond the scope that scientists can reach.
Thank you very much. And on that subject, I mean, Song Chen's work is clearly symbolic in its critique. It's perhaps you could tell us, but I can't see how that is impacting directly on the environment. It might be there to kind of signal ecological issues and hopefully change people's attitudes. but some of the other work is engaged. It's an attempt to change the environment, and it's an attempt to change impact on people's behavior by involving them in projects. Do we have is there any evidence attached to some of the works that have been discussed today that shows the impact that they've had? Is there a long-term impact, or are we just relying on an ambition that we should have an impact on the environment and that we should have an impact on people's behavior that is no longer quite as damaging on the environment? Do we have any evidence of a correlation between the works and that kind of social and environmental impact?
You want me to go first?
Yeah, whichever.
Okay, all right. So yeah, when we think about the impact, right, there are always like multiple ways of looking at it. One is maybe the immediate impact is how many people participated, attended, and how positive the media report on that. I think that's one way. And whether indeed they initiate immediate policy change, right? And then people's behavior. Those we can consider like immediate impact. And that's usually can be easy, but also can be difficult. Can be easy is like if you see an event, a lot of people participate. Like in Chang, in Jinping's many events where he really gather people going to the street, holding the bunch of endangered seeds. Really, they got a lot of participants coming and walking together and shouting out like their words. And that we would say that's the effect is already there, right? But the long-term impact is how those people who participate, will they change their behavior, right? Immediately, or maybe wait for a while, or sometime they encounter another event and then somehow click and they all of a sudden change their behavior. I think that's harder to really to tell, especially with those projects that are just going on, right? And I think for that kind of understanding, we probably need like systematic research to follow up, right?
Yes, indeed. And Chang, have you encountered any in your researches? Have you looked into these questions of impact?
Yeah, I'm just kind of showing you some images, and I think it's going very fast. But yeah, so there are, among the works I talked about, a few of them really had measurable impact, right? So like this Wallace's work actually did keep these Khitan River open and clean and turned it into some kind of communal space. And Uma Lee's also worked. And, you know, like the earlier works, especially like works in China, they often did not really make a measurable impact. I mean, the ones I talked about, Meiqin, what you talked about actually made more practical impact. But I mean, I think that goes back to the question you asked earlier, like like what is art about it? What is artistic about these works and versus what is pragmatic or impactful about these works? And are these two aspects connected, or are they kind of opposed to each other? So I think that's a kind of a very difficult question to wrestle with a lot of these artworks. And I think for those who cannot possibly have a measurable impact, like these, provocative bio art, for example, and it has been argued that the real impact of this art is to allow people to imagine the unimaginable, is to really push the boundary of our cognitive or imaginative abilities, right? So, and in a way, I think the eco crisis we're facing now is planetary, it's monumental, it's gigantic that we feel kind of powerless against it. But some of the artworks really kind of propose these almost unthinkable scenarios that allow us to kind of leap, above and beyond and go, maybe for a moment, sort of feel that the unimaginable scenarios could be imagined in either a good or bad way. So this type of cognitive leap, although it's not measurable, but it might have some fundamental impact over a very long term. So that's a kind of another side of the question. So in a way, I think these being impactful and being artistic could be connected if the artwork really allows us to go to a different way of thinking about things.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting conundrum, isn't it? Because huge claims have been made for decades about the impact of socially engaged art, and those vaulting claims have become ever louder over recent years. And of course, that begs the question, as Grant Kester has pointed out, that, well, you can make those claims, but is there actually any impact? Is there any change? The problem of going down that rabbit warren is that it can often take one away from some of the qualities which are specific to artistic experience and aesthetic experience. And so there's a constant tension between the two. On the other hand, we're living in dire times. And unless we collectively understand the threat to the environment that's currently in front of us and do something about it, then it's not the planet that's going to die, it's going to be us. The Earth will continue quite happily without us, and actually quite gladly, many species would be glad to see the back of us, given the damage that we've wrought. So perhaps some of these paradoxes are in some ways a little bit scholastic in the face of those other problems. One last question before we go to Q&A is just to both of you is, so what's Sinosphere about this? What's specifically culturally Chinese about the examples that you've shown us? Meiqin?
Sure. Specifically Chinese, then I think Chang's case is like she being utilized traditional landscape motif, and Song Chen's work, the case that I discussed, she goes back to ancient Chinese creation myth. I think that's definitely unique, right? That's shared by Chinese population, but may not be so widely aware by people in other societies. So maybe the cultural tradition, I would say, and then the aesthetic tradition, the art practice that associated with the cultural tradition, that may be something I can just think of from my top of my head. But what do you have, Chang?
Well, this is like my biggest problem here, right? So it's because eco art is almost by definition like global. So why do I want to restrict my discussion to the Sinosphere? So that's something I was attempting to answer by saying that these three groups of artworks I discussed in a way could only happen in the Sinosphere. And again, this is still, I'm not sure that I have a, kind of ironclad case here, but I'm just throwing it out there. And one is this landscape tradition that people in the Sinosphere do share to some degree. And secondly, for this bio art, I would say it's the kind of cultural and legal circumstances in China and Taiwan that seem to allow this type of art to happen. Okay, for cadaver art, some of the art, the first art I talked about was really causing global outrage, but many have argued it's because of the Buddhist tradition in China, and more importantly, the kind of lax enforcement about laws regarding using corpses that allowed this type of artwork to happen. So this to some degree is also the case in Taiwan, because as we know, like Buddhism sees all beings as being equal. Humans are not in any way different from other species fundamentally. So I think this kind of cultural attitude may also have allowed this type of experiment to happen to some degree. Okay, I hesitate about making this sweeping statement, but it might have some factor to it. And the last group of artwork I talk about, I think it's because land is even more contentious in the Sinosphere than elsewhere, because as I said, it's so densely populated over many hundreds of years. And places like Taiwan, Hong Kong, it's so subject to interpretations. Whom do this land belong to politically, economically? So I think this fight over land is also something that is not only about Sinosphere, but seems to be more intense in the Sinosphere. So these are the three things I think are somewhat special in the Sinosphere that breed a specific kind of eco art.
I think that's a great response. I mean, there's certainly contemporary artists in the Sinosphere are definitely engaging with the artistic, practical, and aesthetic traditions, particularly in Chinese culture, particularly those related to Confucian literati, aesthetics, and landscape painting. But I think you raise some very interesting points, which are just about the kind of political economies of the Sinosphere, which of course are not monolithic, but these questions about the land and ownership of the land and the historical treatment of the land, that it wasn't, Chinese landscape wasn't ever really pristine. There's been management of the Chinese landscape going back thousands of years and ecological degradation like there has been in many spaces. But we haven't got time to talk about it here, but the one thing I would draw attention to is that Emersonian philosophy and transcendentalism and things downstream of that, like the philosophy of Dewey in America, strongly resonant with the Chinese intellectual tradition, either directly or indirectly. And I think it's worth thinking about that, because that connection to the land is absolute cornerstone of American art, certainly from the Romantic period onwards. And I think it's worth exploring the resonance between the two. Anyway, do we have any questions from our wonderful audience?
We do. Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you so much, Chang and Meiqin. This has been amazing. It's been a really, really great presentation. Our first question will be from GE.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And thank you, Paul and panel. The question is kind of a generalized question. Can you talk about the engagement of social norms and the associated consumerism that seems to be the driving force behind many of the works we've seen this evening, and others, of course?
Chang or Meiqin, do you want to respond to that?
Which works do you think are driven by consumerism?
It seems as though, maybe it's my take.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it would be, but it seems as though so much is centered on the end of our overall consumerism, which is connected to all these ecological disasters, the devastation of animal populations, the subservience of animal populations, and the subservience and degradation of the land. Is it to me, it comes down to consumerism and how that's become so conditioned, those patterns have become so conditioned to then take us where we are today, and of course where we aren't. And it seems as though that is so linked into many of the works here. And I guess I'm asking, does that seem to ring true at all?
Yeah, I think it rings true in different ways about different works, right? So like the work by Brandan Wang, these kind of artificial shiny rocks, I think it reminds us that these Chinese gardens from the ancient times, Ming and Qing, they were actually a form of consumerism, for example. Like only very wealthy people could afford to have like this garden in their backyard, which takes a lot of human labor and takes transportation of, very valuable objects such as rocks and some of the exotic plants and flowers. So I think that asks this very troubling question, like, to what degrees our love of nature is also a way of consumerist display. And so that's an interesting question for that. And for the bio art, I would say it really, when we think about things like plastic surgery and other ways to really see our own bodies as a form of consumerist perfection, or the possibility of consumerist perfection. And these works, they're, they're ethically troublesome, but really it's not that different from like doing plastic surgery, these type of things that we do routinely. So I think that's also, way connected to consumerism. And I think for the socially engaged work, one of the artists actually said that, the one about the East Lake, you have people to jump into the lake. They say that Chinese population have been so conditioned by the sort of capitalist lifestyle that every day you drive to work and you don't look at your surroundings. You don't care if the water is dirty because you would never get close to it. And so the way he designed his work is to really allow people to break away from this type of routine lifestyle for just a moment, even for just a moment. And then he said something about to nudge people towards the anarchism of the mind, like to think outside of the box, so to speak. So I think they all have something to do with consumerism. Yeah.
And if I may add, I'm going to add a little bit from the other side of the spectrum is it's the result of the consumerism, right? A lot of trash, a lot of garbage, and then indeed the ecological art festival in 2020, organized, led by SUNY, it's actually the core idea, the core thesis is respect garbage, reject waste. And so it's actually indeed driven by those professors of the art institute. They were shocked by the annual dump of trash on campus. Every graduation season, students just dump everything. So every campus has like a pile, heels of trash they have to really get rid of, right? And among those are so a big amount is art trash. It's art trash, pigments, canvas, display board, everything. The students expected, and then they just dumped away, right? So they really, so the exhibition, the festival, the entire festival is a lot of exhibitions and community engagement project, all really driven by this critical reflection of how art students, how art universities create trash. So definitely, yeah, it's a critique of the consumerism. That's embodied in the way our art is produced. Art students are educated, basically.
I think it's also worth noting that these troublesome Western post-Enlightenment terms, art and aesthetics, are partially misleading in relation to what we've talked about. One of the strong elements here, seems to me at least, is the remotivation of the Chinese garden tradition. And I think a lot of what we're looking at in terms of these socially engaged works is a kind of rethinking through of what that tradition might be. I mean, certainly Chang's alluded to that. And of course, it's not really a purely Chinese tradition. Mm-hmm. I mean, since the 17th and 18th century, it's been in constant dialogue with other spaces, Japan, Europe, the so-called English garden tradition. So we have to think of it in a more polylogic way, I guess, downstream of the 17th century.
Thank you also very, very much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that question, GE. I would like to ask a question. I'm curious if you can speak to kind of differences and similarities in eco art or the concepts that were discussed in China and in the US.
Okay, that's a very broad question. And so you're talking about what's going on currently, right? So eco art, I think now it's becoming both important or prominent in China, but also in a way tamed. I don't know if that's true. It's actually, Meiqin probably knows about what is going on in the eco art scene in China right now, but mine is, like, for example, I can only speak to what I know, which is, a lot of the eco art in China right now do not seem to be too confrontational. Instead, it's more kind of emphasizing on self-cultivation, the changing of individual behavior, the kind of pragmatic sort of encounter with different parts, different aspects of the environment, like really kind of cultivating your own garden sort of way. And I think it actually used to be more confrontational. It kind of become less so in the past 5 to 10 years. But in the US, I think it's kind of going to the opposite direction. It's really kind of people feel increasingly that just, changing individual behaviors is not enough. It's really about kind of criticizing the system, like starting from corporations and the governments that back them, and it also goes more to the direction of research-based art, that you really kind of, for example, you draw a map of where all the nuclear waste is buried in different part of the US, and you publicize this result online together with all the photographs you have taken from these sites. And so you see they seem normal, but actually they're kind of toxic, right? So these are like a direct confrontation with what the power network is doing to the population, and to really publicize it in a way that is sharply critical. So I think this type of eco art used to be done in China to some degree. Like I think it's Wang Chang, I'm sorry if I got the name wrong, did kind of marked all the garbage burning sites around Beijing on a map, and kind of coupled them with photographs of people who live in these sites to collect and recycle garbage. And so, but that happened about 10, 12 years ago. And I think it's happening less, if at all, in China today. So I would say this is the difference I'm seeing for some obvious reasons, I guess.
Chang, are you talking about Wang Juliang? Is the
Wang Juliang, yes.
Okay.
Wang Juliang.
Yeah. And I think I'd like to echo with what Chang was saying, that I think that really comes down to the basic or the difference between socially engaged art in general here in US, in China. If we want to draw really broad, right, generalize the conclusion, of course, there's always case by case, right? There's always really depends on case. But in general, indeed, most socially engaged art practitioners, including eco art practitioners, try to avoid direct confrontational kind of approach, because they want to get things done. They have to a certain degree, work with local authorities, officials, establish the cultural institutions. Otherwise, it's really hard to get anything public done in a way that they want to. Of course, this like a constant negotiation between the power structure. Is have to find a way to really get your work done, and compromise negotiation, I think, is a constant challenge among the practitioners in China. The number of reasons, the obvious reason indeed, right, the top-down control, but also there's maybe because of the top-down control, there's the civil society is relatively, the space, right, for civil society is relatively limited, so that they just produce different kind of ways dealing with environmental problems and the urgent the matter here. And also allow me to bring in this official discourse, eco-civilization, right, which now has been such a big national discourse. So it at the same time opens up space, but also close some space, right? At the same time, it opens up space for artists to really utilize this official language to convince their local authorities. This is coming from top down, from the central government, right? So some artists are utilizing this official discourse to convince their originally the local, maybe some local official institutions or officials who probably did not care much, but now they also think they have to care about the environment, at least on appearance, right? So, but then also you have this now is becoming a national discourse, and then you have a lot of official institutions, public institutions participating in, and they should compete for the very limited resource and the infrastructure. So yeah, it's like going on hand by hand.
I think this speaks to some, not exactly absolute, but certainly significant differences in cultural discursive outlook. Certainly since the Enlightenment, in Eurocentric context, two games have been in town. One is a more oppositional or confrontational form of critique, cultural critique, and the other is deconstructive critique. What's interesting about both of those is they've become institutionalized. So that artists and other cultural workers can mount those forms of critique, but they become assimilated into the mainstream. And therefore they become symbolic of critique rather than necessarily effective. In China, confrontational critique historically has been difficult to mount in an authoritarian context. And particularly now where, as Meiqin has just alluded to, where you have official political discourses that effectively cut off forms of critique off at the pass by institutionalizing them. So there are kind of similarities between Eurocentric and Chinese context in that regard. But one of the differences is that criticism, certainly amongst the intellectual elites and cultural elites in China, historically have neither been wholly confrontational nor deconstructive, but have taken more oblique or tangential approaches to sustaining the state whilst also critiquing overweening authority. And I think there are the traces of those discursive political cultural differences do inhere within China and outside of China, within the Sinosphere, which of course cuts across any geographical boundaries.
Thank you so much. Those were such great answers. In the interest of time, I think we're going to now transition to our concluding poetry reading. We have a tradition of ending all of our community events here at the Rail with a poetry reading. And today I'm thrilled to welcome our Poet Laureate of the day, Brandan Griffin, to the stage. Brandan Griffin is the author of Impastoral and a forthcoming chapbook called For Concretchers. Hope I said that right. His poems have been published in Tagwork and Chicago Review, among others. He currently lives in Kansas City, Missouri. Thank you so much for being here, Brandan.
Thank you for having me. And thank you everyone for the wonderful presentations and conversation. So I'm just going to be reading one poem from my book, Impastoral. All that goes frothing generously there. Geyser thread, that's twang of commons. Clear polyp strands plume up. Materials, if have wet lucence. Vent, boil up pluming. Geyser vent feathering up. In matter, what is aware? Hua, Osha, and O-sheathing slides in, venting, plumes. Slops ocean, almost no light except sub-torches, all over with lit up space. Video makes light there. How's their difference? Logic asks, why not all one white haze? Won't ne view, plumbing, up blubble plums to breathes. Each with its life, pluming. But how's being this, not being that? How's awareness end? And then another's picks up. How many levels of transparence? Di eoing, wide eo of sleeping rock, swishing, gill sleeps in valve in wave. What's in salt jellies? All us clicks slopping together in prism case. Coral gapes spouting up flows. Voidio, wades vent, opens, flows out. Continent valve keeps, mapping, floor floats past shelf. Wakes up and coral glass inserts in head, so that one can be there, not yet bleached. One gets dunked into skull in glass fishy or log, or one log rammed into skull as seen through jelly because one's there. Cur hacking water, in earth blow, bowl of earth vents, violet streams, fill were earled under raw sways through max density. Vein winds its here, gel plane flown blue through, organ in blurry organ waves. Bobble, each stem a tall window. It sways, each us perches in salt. Corkle, carol, core, hole, mouthing rock, it mouths rock, drinks. Anemo, knees, daisies, golden eye hole sucks in. Opaque, no unit it, no unlit. Sub's air helmet isn't ocean, carrying glugs of sky, at noon on waves. Wind tips that ocean elsewhere. Trends, parents, trends, peers, earses, bag of petals, be agging right now. Optica illusion, daisy grows in bag, no light. How can difference be at all? What's look? What's be there? Cuttlefish emerging from shadow suit. It drags ocean. Sky knocks on water lid with time. Cuttlefish isn't black tux. Ocean following. Silk jacket. In bagag, some kind of throughness, rashes in bag. The fat cell eye is closed. No differences, but differences, summed up in what's same. Like white, no different from any colors, though it looks different. All it flashes up. Gabagagag, the bag, no light, yet light enters. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brandon. That was really beautiful. And a huge thanks again to Chang and Paul and Meiqin. It's been a really lovely evening. Thanks to all of you for tuning in this evening, and thank you to the Terra Foundation for sponsoring this NSE program and for supporting our growing archive, which you can view on our YouTube channel, which is where the recording of this conversation will be posted shortly. For the past 22 years, the Rail has been a platform for arts, politics, and culture through our monthly publication and public events, like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for a conversation with the Brooklyn Rail's March 2023 Critics Page contributors. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Jen Fisher. And you can now all turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all so much. It's been so great.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Absolutely brilliant.
Thank you, Brandon, for the poetry.
Yes, thank you for the reading, Brandon. Have a great night,
poetry,
everyone.
Brandon.